Hello hunters, and welcome back to Super Fan Natural. Psychic. It's a word that can mean a bunch of different things, especially in a series full of magic-powered monster people. In Supernatural, the term psychic, at least as a noun, is usually reserved for humans who are born with an innate superhuman ability linked to the mind or senses, things like ESP, telekinesis, precognition, and mind reading. There are a bunch of psychics across the show, but the thing is, their abilities manifest in all sorts of different ways, with no two psychics being exactly the same. Well, unless they're directly related. In those cases, sometimes people do have the same powers, but that still leaves us with a whole lot of variety amongst the series' scions. In this video, I'll discuss every single psychic in the show and give you a breakdown of their powers and story. Before beginning, you know we gotta specify what qualifies someone to be on this list. After all, angels have the innate ability to read thoughts and move objects with their mind. Do they count as psychic? What about witches? They've got all sorts of magical tricks, and some wield very psychic-y powers like telekinesis. So, would they count as psychic? For the purposes of this list, I'm going to focus on human characters that are identified as psychic and nothing else. So, no witches, no monsters, and no hybrids. I'm also not going to talk about prophets or dreamwalkers, mostly because this video will be long enough already. Alright, let's get into the psychics. The first, and largest group of people that we'll cover, are all natural psychics, meaning that they were born with their powers. We don't really know what causes people like this to be born with these abilities. It's just sort of like a mutation, similar to how some people are born with an innate talent for witchcraft. The first psychic to appear in the show, sorta, was a woman named Missouri Mosley. Missouri was a professional psychic based out of Lawrence, Kansas, where she would give psychic readings to customers wanting a little peek behind the temporal curtain. In terms of her actual powers, Missouri's gifts mostly revolve around sensing things. She primarily used a form of ESP that allowed her to detect and read vague spiritual energy hanging around people and objects, and under the right circumstances, these allowed her to parse together information about the past, present, or future. She made a point of telling Dean that she couldn't just pull facts out of thin air, although later in the series we see that she did occasionally get premonitions about the future. Finally, she was one of the most gifted human telepaths in the show, as she could effortlessly sense people's thoughts without even trying. One thing that really made Missouri somewhat unique among psychics was her awareness of the wider supernatural world. Despite their abilities, many psychics are oblivious to the existence of monsters and demons and such. But not only did Miss Missouri know about such things, she had expertise on par with seasoned hunters. Despite only appearing in 2 episodes of the show, Missouri was actually one of the most important characters to the story of the Winchesters, as she played a major role in the boys becoming hunters. After Mary Winchester was killed under mysterious circumstances, a clueless John was left confused and angry, and in his desperation for answers, he turned to Missouri. Now, Missouri doesn't always tell her customers the truth about what she sees or senses, but on this occasion, she decided to give John the full rundown on the monster-filled world hidden in the shadows of human society. Yeah, this lady is heavily responsible for the creation of borderline psychotic monster hunter John Winchester. Years later, she would help Sam and Dean cleanse their childhood home of a poltergeist. One thing that some fans might not know about Missouri was originally she was supposed to be a major character in the show, essentially having Bobby's role as the wise mentor to the boys. Unfortunately, the actress Loretta Devine chose to focus on other roles, so Bobby was chosen to fill in her original purpose. Still, she managed to come back for one more appearance in season 13, where she's killed by a wraith. We wouldn't see another natural psychic until the season 4 premiere, where we were introduced to Pamela Barnes. Pam was an old friend of Bobby's, with clairvoyant abilities that let her see and sense things that regular people just couldn't. Honestly, her exact powers are probably the most vague out of everyone on this list, but by far her most, impactful skill was her ability to perform seances, in which she makes psychic contact with spiritual beings like demons and angels. After Dean was resurrected from hell, Bobby called Pamela in order to find out what or whom had raised Dean. She dials in and manages to contact Castiel, but unfortunately, she doesn't heed his warning about humans seeing the true faces of angels. So, when Pam presses the connection and glimpses his real form, her eyes melt right out of her face. Luckily, she was able to adjust, since her powers let her sort of see the world around her with some unspecified second sight. Pamela could also hypnotize people, which could be used to help unlock repressed memories or cause the subject to astral project out of their bodies for a while. Though, weirdly, Pam couldn't see or sense the spirits of people on the astral plane. Honestly, if I had to sum up Pamela's role in the show, it would be provider of magical bullshit for season 4. She just gets called in to help with things that the boys don't have any other resources for, up until she finally ends up getting fatally shivved by a demon. She gets into heaven though, so that's nice at least. So natural psychics are fairly rare in Supernatural, at least in comparison to things like ghosts and vampires. However, in the Season 7 episode, The Mentalists, we get a story revolving around an entire town of alleged psychic folks. Lilydale, the psychic capital of America, which by the way is a real town with a history of spiritualism. The version in Supernatural is a quaint little town packed to the gills with people claiming to have a variety of psychic powers. And while it's heavily implied that the majority of them are fakes, there are a handful who have some actual juice. For example, the villain of the episode was a guy named Jimmy Tomorrow who had actual telekinetic powers. We didn't see much from him, all he did was Jedi a small gun into his hand, but hey, that's still pretty neat. Unfortunately, his skills just didn't pay the bills. Despite being one of the few real psychics in town, Jimmy's career never took off. He lacked showmanship, and anyone who learned that his powers were real tended to freak out, in a bad way. This led to Mr. Tomorrow developing a grudge against all the fakers hogging the spotlight, so he did the only logical thing: summon a ghost with necromancy and use her to axe the competition. Naturally. Ultimately, his force powers were no match for the Second Amendment, and Sam was able to end his act with a single bullet. James T. Morrow was the mastermind behind the Lilydale slayings, but he wasn't the only psychic involved. His accomplice/attack ghost, Margaret Fox, was also a genuine mindbender, at least according to Jimmy. In life, Margaret was part of a 2-woman psychic act along with her sister Kate, though according to a guy at the Lilydale Museum, Margaret didn't have any actual powers. Jimmy claims that she really did, with the implication that her sister took all the credit for the routine due to her skills with the audience, but the exact details of this situation aren't super clear. Whatever the case, Margaret died full of resentment due to her lack of recognition, and so, when Jimmy called her up with his stupid plan, she was fully on board and willingly carried out his hits. Since we only see her as a ghost, it's kinda hard to say what kind of powers Margaret had in life. Museum Guy claims that the Fox Sister Act involved telekinesis and visions of people's deaths, and we see both of these tricks from Ghost Marge. In the end, her petty spirit is sent into the afterlife, after Sam torches her stolen bones, which were in Jimmy's bed for some godforsaken reason. Margie's issues stem from her inability to escape the shadow of her sister, so it only makes sense that Kate would also try to upstage her in death. After Margaret was summoned back to Earth, her sister's spirit followed her, but instead of trying to snipe fakers, Kate chose to try and warn the targets about their imminent demise. Now, even as a ghost, Kate retained the ability to speak, and she could make herself visible for at least a moment. As such, you'd think that she would just pop in to say, "Yo, my psychotic psychic sister is come to ice you," right? I mean, that would definitely scare the ever-loving shit out of the mark, but at least they'd know what's coming. Well, Kate decided to go with a different approach. Remember how I said that the sisters could allegedly see the future? Well, that seems to be a power that Kate had in both life and death, as she would apparently get visions of her sister's ghost slayings before they happened. Then, instead of just talking to the prospective Vic, she'd go up to them, invisibly, and share her grisly foresight with them, allowing them to see their end before it happened. Keep in mind, the reason why most of these people were targeted was because they were fake psychics. They'd never had real visions before. So, as you might expect, they didn't exactly get the message that Kate was trying to give them. Even once the Winchesters roll into town, they believed that the visions were a threat from Kate herself, so they torch her bones and sent her back to the afterlife. I tell you what, Kate, your intentions were good, but holy crap were your methods terrible. Also, just FYI, Kate and Margaret Fox were actually real people who claimed to be real psychics, and while you may or may not believe that they had any genuine powers, they weren't, like, evil or anything, so it's kind of weird that the show turned one of them into a killer ghost. Oh, but we're not quite done with this one episode yet, as there's one more real psychic skulking around Lilydale. You know that museum guy I've mentioned a couple times? The one who told the boys about the Fox sisters? Well, apparently, he also had a little bit of psychic juju, which allowed him to pick up messages from beyond the grave. After finishing the tour, Museum Guy, whose name tag I couldn't make out, pulls Dean aside and tells him that he's got a collect call from Ellen Harville, who died 2 years prior. It's not clear if he was hearing Ellen in real time or passing on a message he'd gotten earlier, but either way, it seemed to be legit, unless of course this guy is just the absolute best cold reader in the entire history of the world. We also don't know where Ellen was calling from. I mean, it was probably heaven, but our ghost hotline doesn't say. After relaying the message, Museum Guy just goes on with his merry way, and we never see him again. By now, you may have picked up on the fact that while psychics may have an edge over regular folks, they aren't exactly the deadliest of paranormal things. However, our next entry is not only the strongest psychic in the show, he's also one of the most powerful humans, period. Fred Jones was a special type of psychic known as a psychokinetic, a distinction that doesn't get explained too terribly well within the show. According to Dean, regular psychokinetics can move objects with their minds, which is something we saw Fred do. However, that's not where Fred's powers stop. No, what makes this dude unique is that his mind is capable of bending the very laws of reality itself to a literally cartoonish degree. Like, you know how in cartoons people can do things like walk off a cliff and not fall until they look down? Yeah, Fred can make shit like that happen in real life. That's a level of power that's usually reserved for archangels, yet this random dude could just accidentally Looney Tunes the world around him. There are theories that Fred might not have been a regular human psychic, like maybe he was secretly a Nephilim or a Cambion or something else, but nothing like that was ever confirmed, and also Cass probably would have been able to sense something like that. Anyway, despite his power, Fred was actually a pretty chill dude who really didn't have much interest in abusing his abilities. Unfortunately, his mind deteriorated with age, and eventually he was moved into a nursing home where he slipped into a catatonic state, just sitting around mindlessly watching Warner Bros. Cartoons. Once his psyche went on autopilot, Fred's powers began to leak out, creating a little zone of influence around him where reality operated on toon logic. Eventually, one of the doctors noticed this and decided that the best way to make use of these godlike abilities was burglary. So he'd drive Fred to places he wanted to plunder and exploit the territory of Toon Force in order to get in and get that loot. Unfortunately for the doc, the Winchesters had met and befriended Fred when they were kids, so once they saw him in the home, they were able to figure out what was going on. Cass mind-melded Sam and Fred, allowing Sam to reach the old guy's consciousness and snap him out of his waking coma. Fred murks the doc, but fearing that he might cause more chaos, he chooses to have Cass disable his powers for good, an act which irreparably fries his brain. Up next, we've got one of the more confusing characters in Supernatural, Oliver Price. Oliver was a telepath and a medium with limited control over his abilities. As a boy, he performed seances and mind-reading tricks all over the country, until one day he was discovered by the secret society known as the Men of Letters. The Mole wanted to train Oliver so that he could better control his skills, but before they could get too far, the club got gutted by the demon Abaddon. Sometime after that fell through, Oliver became overwhelmed by the thoughts that he couldn't help but hear. So he shut himself away in his house until the season 10 episode, Inside Man, when Sam and Cass come knocking for a bit of help. See, we've covered psychics who could contact the other side, but what made Oliver so unique is that he could not only call heaven, he could go as far as to connect to a specific person's personal heaven and call them specifically. After becoming desperate to help Dean with an ancient curse, Sam decided to have Oliver help them ring up Bobby for one last job, which he does successfully, and after that we don't see this dude again. The weirdest thing about Oliver is that he was a self-proclaimed atheist, which normally wouldn't be weird, but this guy apparently knew how to dial up heaven, and in all the years of his psychic calls, he never asked himself, if heaven is real, I wonder who's in charge of running it? Like, that would be my first question. Yet Ollie here didn't believe in angels until he met Cass. Also, according to him, Cass at least thinks in colors, or at least that's what he saw when he tried to read his mind. No clue if that's a Cass thing or an angel thing. I'd believe either one. Next, we've got one of the most tragic psychics in the show. Magda Peterson originally had a pretty normal life. I mean, she was telepathic and telekinetic, but that didn't seem to affect her all that much. That is, until the day that she accidentally caused a car wreck with her family inside. In the wake of the accident, Magda's parents realized that, oh my god, our daughter is possessed by Satan, and also cell phones are bad, and the entire world is corrupt. Naturally, such a revelation drove them to go off-grid and live that isolated farm life, which wouldn't be too bad, except they also felt it was necessary to give their evil daughter the super carry treatment. They faked her death, locked her away in a basement, and forced her to torture herself as penance for the sin of being born psychic. That's pretty friggin' dark, and as you might expect, Magda was desperate for help. So, on the rare occasion when the family would get a visitor from the outside world, Magda would reach out psychically in order to try and get them to come rescue her. Unfortunately, she didn't really know what she was doing. So, instead of a telepathic DM, the would-be rescuer shared Magda's torture and got their brain microwaved. After that, the poor girl kinda lost hope, which can't really blame her for that. Thankfully, Sam and Dean show up and rescue Magda from her fully psychotic Jim Jones mom, and she lives happily ever after for about 5 minutes. Then Ketch ganks her because, she's dangerous. We next saw a couple of psychics in the season 13 episode, Patience. And by couple, I mean 2. Well, technically 3, since this episode marks the return and exit of Missouri, but honestly her role in the episode is mostly to introduce her granddaughter, the titular Patience Turner. Patience always knew that her grandma claimed to be psychic, but even if she believed that was true, she definitely didn't think that she inherited any of her powers. Well, that is until Missouri was killed by a wraith who had a taste for psychic brains. For reasons that aren't fully explained, the night that Missouri died, Patience's powers fully kicked in, giving her a vision of the monster attacking her the next day. Yeah, instead of reading minds and energy like her grandma, Patience got precognitive abilities that occasionally gave her a sneak peek of the future. This mostly manifested as visions, but it's also sort of implied that she had a kind of spidey sense that let her detect incoming attacks much earlier, thus giving Patience some top-tier reflexes. Her premonition came true, and the Wraith tried to suck out Patience's extra special brain juices. But with the help of the Winchesters and Jody Mills, the mind-munching monster was slain. After that, Patience tried to live a normal life, but she soon finds that she can't ignore her visions, and ultimately, she becomes a member of the Wayward Sisters, a group of young women who help hunt monsters under the guidance/tutelage of Jody. For anyone who watched the show and wondered what the point of this storyline was, it was meant to get its own spin-off, but ultimately that just never materialized. In addition to its titular character, the aforementioned episode also featured another psychic named Dee Dee. She's just the opening victim, so we don't get a lot from her, but apparently she had some sort of energy reading power or something. Honestly, I don't really know what to call this. She would put her hands on either side of a person's head and was then able to see or sense things that were normally invisible. It's not really clear what she would normally see during these readings, but we know that if she reads a wraith, she'll glimpse their true monster face. Of course, that means she'll also probably have to face off against the creature, which, as we see, is not her forte, as she ends up getting a lethal brain suck. Alright, so we're down to the last 2 natural psychics, and luckily, they both show up in the season 14 episode, Peace of Mind. I'm sure most of us have thought about all the naughty things we would do if we could psychically control the minds and will of other people. Well, when Chip Harrington discovered his mental powers, he decided to use them in the absolute most logical way possible. See, Chip was the mayor of a town charmingly named Charming Acres, and he desperately wanted things to just be like they were in the good old days of his youth. The 50s, but not like the real 50s. No, Chip preferred the Norman Rockwell-esque fake 50s, where there's no problems and everything is just peachy keen. After his wife died, Chip realized that he actually had the power to subsume the minds and wills of other people telepathically, allowing him to essentially override their personalities and memories and reprogram them to think and act however he wanted. This insane power allowed him to convert the Arkansas crap hole into a picture-perfect old-timey town, though his control wasn't perfect. It was possible for anachronistic information to worm its way into his subject's mind and slowly chip away at Chip's programming, though in situations like this, he had an airtight solution. If someone started seeing through the Matrix, old Chip would just go full scanners and pop their fucking head like a jack-o'-lantern full of C4. Then he'd recast the lost character with someone new. Easy peasy. These head-scrambling and curse-sploding powers didn't work on angels, so when Sam ultimately fell under the spell, Cass was able to continue the case and ultimately uncover Chip's Pleasantville plot. He was nearly thwarted by the psychic and his mind-controlled mob, but before Chip could finish off the pair, his daughter Sunny revealed that she was also a super strong Esper. She not only inherited her dad's mind control powers, she was also immune to his influence, meaning that he couldn't sway or puppet her like everyone else. Sunny put up with her dad's shenanigans for years, but once she got fed up, she decided to neutralize him by trapping his consciousness in a mental world where he could live out his ideal life without ever hurting anyone else ever again. Personally, I find it crazy that the British Men of Letters took the time to take out poor Magda, but they never noticed this psycho controlling an entire town. Like, this shit is 100 times more dangerous than what she did, yet they never even caught a whiff of this Rockwellian nightmare? Poor form, lads. Poor form. Alright, so those are all of the naturally born human psychics that appear in the show, I think. For the second half of this video, let's talk about some unnatural psychics. The first 2 seasons of the show revolve around a group of young adults known as the Psychic Kids, people who were visited by the demon Azazel as babies and fed some of his evil blood. This ritual granted them various psychic abilities that would manifest after their 22nd birthday. Up first, we've got one of the main stars of the show, Sam Winchester himself. Yeah, the whole reason why this storyline was so important is because it tied directly into Sam. Early in the first season, it was established that Sam had been having prophetic dreams about people dying. For example, he apparently foresaw the death of his fiancée Jessica several weeks before it actually happened, and as the season goes on, his visions happen more frequently. At first, he only gets quick flashes while sleeping, but over time his insight becomes more detailed and his visions start coming while he's awake. Also, one time and one time only, he telekinetically moved a table in order to get out of a closet, so I guess that was something he could do. After Azazel got, Sam stopped getting visions, and for a while, it seemed like his powers had gone away. However, the demon Ruby eventually revealed that he still had abilities, they just required the right diet and exercise to activate. So, Sam began a training routine which involved drinking demon blood in order to power up, and eventually, he unlocked the ability to manipulate demonic essence, allowing him to throw, exercise, and even kill demons with just his mind. At its peak, this power allowed Sam to destroy the first and most powerful demon, Lilith. But after this sets off the apocalypse, he realizes just how fucked up all this was and swears off the demoglobin for good. He relapsed once in Season 5 due to the influence of the Horseman famine, but after that, he never drinks the stuff or shows off any psychic powers ever again. Well, technically we saw an alternate universe version of him wielding the dark powers, but that doesn't count. The next dark psychic to surface was a guy named Max Miller. This kid had a rough life. Azazel murked his mom when Max was only 6 months old, thus leaving him at the mercy of his abusive dad and uncle. Max took a lifetime of beatings, so when his powers awoke, he decided to get some payback. Mr. Miller was telekinetic, which is a pretty common trick in Supernatural. However, while most beings use the Force to crudely push or pull things, Max demonstrated a pretty impressive amount of control. He could mentally wield a gun similar to Chris Evans in the movie Push, and while using his powers to off his abusive family, his antics were so hands-off that Sam thought they were the work of a ghost. Ultimately, Max couldn't handle the pain of his actions and experiences, so he opted to suck down some self-served lead. Up next, we've got another mind controller in the form of Andrew Gallagher, aka Andy. We don't get much backstory on Andy. He was adopted as a baby, at 6 months old, his adoptive mom was slain by the demon, and as an adult, he lived what most would call a slacker life, literally living in a van that was probably down by a river on occasion. After his 22nd birthday, Andy developed a kind of hypnotic mind control, or persuasion, that allowed him to manipulate people with his words. Basically, he could tell people what he wanted them to think or do, and it would happen. Though it was a bit more complicated, since on at least one occasion, he was able to get something from someone by asking if he could have it instead of outright commanding them to give it to him. Now, this was an incredibly devious power, and Andy wasn't exactly a saint with it. But ultimately, he also wasn't evil, and we didn't see him use it for anything unforgivably bad. Andy was a pretty chill dude. He liked his powers and used it to live a charmed life. But eventually, people around his town started offing themselves in a manner that really made it seem like they were being mind-controlled. Naturally, the Winchesters suspected Andy, but he proved to be innocent, as the real perp was his evil twin. A few months after the incident, Andy was abducted by demons and dumped into an abandoned town along with a few other psychic kids. During the time skip, his powers evolved, allowing him to project thoughts and images into people's minds non-verbally. He was able to use this new skill to help direct Dean and Bobby to the ghost town, but then he ends up getting shredded by the powers of another psychic. Womp womp. So, you may have caught the little mention there of an evil twin. Yeah, Andy had a twin brother named Ansem Weems, aka Weber. We know less about this dude than we do about his cooler bro. At some point, he found out that he was adopted and that he'd been separated from Andy at birth, and he became desperate to reunite with his other half. Weber developed the same kind of mind control as Andy, though by the time of his killing spree, he developed the ability to control people non-verbally. I should also point out that both versions of this control were useless against other demonic psychics, like neither brother had any power over Sam. Ansem used his sway to off his biomom and the doctor who separated him from Andy, then he tried to take out Andy's crush before his bro capped him. Some of you might be wondering why all of the psychics except Sam get some cool active powers, while our boy just got nasty visions. Well, he's not the only one who got premonitions. Our next dark psychic, Peoria resident Ava Wilson, initially had what seemed to be the same type of precog powers as Sam, in that she'd occasionally have dreams that let her peek into the future. In fact, Ava's visions actually saved Sam's life, as she foresaw him getting taken out by psychotic hunter Gordon Walker. So yeah, initially, this bubbly little Catherine Isabel character wasn't much in a fight, but that all changed after she was whisked away to the aforementioned ghost town by Old Yellow Eyes. After warping into town, Ava was pitted against other psychics in a deadly free-for-all. During this time, she was somehow able to develop the ability to mentally summon and control certain types of demons. Using these dark spirits as attack dogs, she was able to put down a number of fellow Psychic Kids Club members, including poor Andy, before ultimately getting her neck snapped by another combatant that I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so before we get to the last psychic of any consequence, I gotta quickly mention two whom we basically know nothing about. First, there's Scott Carey, a mentally unstable dude who had some sort of electrical or fire-based touch that could, quote, fry things that he laid his cursed hands upon. Before his death, Scott had been getting dream visits from Azazel, who told him to use his powers for naughtiness. After a therapy sesh, Scott gets stabbed to death by Gordon, and that's the end of him. Later, during the Ghost Town showdown, we met a lady named Lily, who also had some sort of death touch that we didn't see in action. According to Lily, her touch would stop people's hearts, something that she accidentally did to her girlfriend. Before she can really do anything at all, Lily ends up getting ganked by Ava's pet demon. The final demon blood psychic that we saw in the show was a guy named Jake Talley. Jake was an American soldier stationed in Afghanistan when he unlocked his, psychic power of super strength. Yeah, while all the other Wonder Kids get mind-based abilities, Jake was given the power to bench 800 pounds, so calling him psychic feels a bit weird, but whatever. We meet Jake in the ghost town as one of the final contestants, along with Sam, Ava, Andy, and Lily. Initially, he seemed pretty cool. Once he sees proof of demons, he starts listening to Sam, and almost takes a kind of second-in-command role in order to keep order. Once Ava reveals her killer instinct, Jake is the one to put her down with a fatal chiropractic adjustment, which saved Sam's life and should have ended the battle royale. Unfortunately, Jake had apparently gotten an off-screen dream visit from Azazel, who convinced him that there could be only one. So, he and Sam have a little tussle, which results in Sam getting literally and fatally stabbed in the back. Afterwards, Jake gets some more sweet-talking from the Prince of Hell, and ultimately, he ends up convinced to bring about the end of the world, because it might be pretty sweet. Honestly, it's always bothered me how quickly Jake was turned, but whatever, I guess he just really liked the demon sales pitch. After joining the dark side, Jake gained mind control powers similar to the twins, though his eyes flashed yellow for a sec after using his new trick. Jake manages to open a doorway to hell and free the demon Lilith before the newly resurrected Sam capped him, finally putting an end to the Psychic Kids Club competition for realsies. And with that, I believe we've covered every single psychic in the show. Well, except for me, of course. On that note, I foresee you liking this video. Also, I'm psychokinetically compelling you to subscribe and share and give me $5. I predict that there will be more videos in the near future, but for now, carry on.